in order to see the middle of the South and look far. Do you believe in weather weapons in this issue? As old fans know, in the past, I was a military theory instructor at a military academy. The main lecture is called New Concept Weapons. Many young friends may have heard of new concept weapons. Older friends may not be too familiar, because a few years ago, we in China incorporated the content of new concept weapons into the military theory courses of college students. In some local universities in China, it is still a compulsory course for our freshman students. You need to take credits. So many years ago, I'm in charge of teaching this course, not to mention the local colleges, the whole army, the whole country. The people who taught the class could count on both hands. What's more, the internet was very inconvenient at that time. So I was teaching, it is very difficult to find materials in class. Unlike today, when the internet is very convenient. So what the experts don't know, you can search on the internet, you can find everything online. Then in order to help everyone gain a deeper understanding of this issue, the program left an impression. So let me give you a brief introduction to what a new concept weapon is. The concept of new concept weapons was first proposed by the Americans. In fact, it was first proposed as disruptive technology. It's called disruptive technology. The US Department of Defense initially identified disruptive technologies as new concept weapons. Therefore, new concept weapons are also called subversive weapons. So you look at new concept weapons, it should be a relative concept. New concept weapons that maybe in the past, with the subsequent large-scale production, invest in a lot of practical applications, it becomes a conventional weapon. For example, I used to give lectures. There was this one called Unmanned Weapons. I used to lecture all those years. The Global Hawk had just come out. It made its first flight in 1998. At that time, the large drones, including our military, had not yet come out. Our civilian DJI has not come out either. So at that time, it was considered that drones were a new concept weapon. But you see today, no one regards drones as new concept weapons anymore, because it is widely used in the two battlefields of Russia, Ukraine, and the Middle East today. Okay, the concept of the new concept weapon is simple and popularized for everyone. Let's get to the point. That is to say, I used to go to some local universities to talk about new concept weapons, because I teach this class all year round for many years. Then I discovered a particularly interesting phenomenon. That is to say, I talk about new concept weapons, talking about including directed energy weapons, laser weapons, particle beam weapons, plasma beam weapons. I could tell by the look in my classmates' eyes that they believed me. Let's talk about kinetic energy weapons, because Patriot 3 had just come out. I said that the principle of interception of the current anti-missile system is fragmentation, but in the future, it is very likely that they will all be patriotic. The third is also called kinetic energy interception. It's called hit-to-hit direct impact interception, speaking of which, I think my classmates also believe it, including my talk about electromagnetic rail. Speaking of artificial intelligence weapons, speaking of non-lethal weapons, secondary weapons, etc., etc., etc. The students believed it. Everyone believes that this is the trend of the times. The future is inevitable. But when it comes to the other two weapons, I can feel it in my eyes. The students didn't believe it. It feels too far away. Probably not in my lifetime. What about these two weapons? One is genetic weaponry. The second is meteorological weapons. So I gave lots of examples based on the facts. Strive to convince the students, but I still don't believe my classmates. I was particularly impressed. It is a very well-known university in China. One of my lectures was about genetic weapons. And then I gave the example, there was a boy sitting in the first row. When he heard I was going to talk about genetic weapons, after listening, he was very excited. Stand up and talk loudly about the teacher. That's not true. I will raise Aristotle's sword of truth to defend the truth. And the students burst into laughter. As a result, the atmosphere in the class was very awkward. I said, classmate, I guess you're right. Aristotle had a sword of truth. You can hold it to defend the truth. But did you know that there is a second half to this sentence? The second half of the sentence is always within the range of artillery. Anyway, in those years, everyone knows, the general atmosphere at local universities is average. It's the other way around. You can't say your country is good, saying that the West is not good. You only need to point out the superiority of our system, the thickness of civilization, the advantages of the system. Someone will fight you to the death. We said that today we have public knowledge online. At that time, it could be said that in some colleges and universities, there were a lot of people who knelt and licked the West. It is believed that the moon in foreign countries is rounder than that in China. Overall, various manifestations of lack of self-confidence. So you said that if it is such a teacher on the podium, can he teach his students well? It would be strange not to take it to the ditch. Of course, I feel that since 1516, this situation has improved. It should be around 2019. Our colleges and universities have begun to attach importance to ideological and political courses. Many universities have also established Marxist colleges. Start paying attention to national security education, patriotic education, etc. In short, it has strengthened the work in this area. Things are getting better. Now it can be said that the atmosphere has completely reversed. An overwhelming situation was formed. Oops, today's show went too far. I mean, what about those years? I talk about new concept weapons on the podium. The most typical example is genetic weapons. People don't believe it. Of course, there is another weapon. People don't believe it. It is a weather weapon. Later, when I saw the weather weapons, people didn't believe it. What do you do? Let me give you an example. I said, look at artificial rainfall. Artificial rainfall is believed. Why don't you believe the Tree Heart Project I told you? In 1993, the HART project was developed by Fairbank, Alaska, initiated by the Branch School. Later, the U.S. Air Force, Navy, and the U.S. Department of Defense's Advanced Research Projects Agency, also called DARPA, funded it. It's called the High Frequency Active Aurora Research Program, because its acronym is HARP, similar to the English word HARP, H-A-R-P. Therefore, it was called the HART project. Later, I asked the class representative, there's good reason for all this. The facts are sufficient. Why don't you believe it? At that time, a class representative said a sentence that makes sense. Although what you said, teacher, is reasonable and well-founded, but beyond everyone's awareness. So many people don't believe it. And I said no further, you in front of the screen. I don't know if I remember after Iranian President Raisi crashed some time ago. I did a program on May 24th this year. The headline at the time was Lacy Crash Investigation Report. 3 details. Was the Lacy helicopter hit by a mysterious weapon? Question mark? Question mark. In this episode, I analyzed one possible reason, one possibility. Of course, I based my analysis on the oral accounts of another senior Iranian official in another plane at that time. The possibility is that airborne laser weapons cause localized air to condense into clouds. Don't talk about the past. I guess everyone will watch my show again today. There will still be many people who don't believe it. Why don't you believe it? This is all outside of cognition. I don't know if you have noticed such a pattern. That is to say, everything as long as it is within your knowledge. Others only said half of it. You can guess what he wants to say in the second half of the sentence. But as long as it's beyond your comprehension, you may not believe what others say. We often say that Zhongshan is not very savvy. Li Si is a man of high comprehension. Sometimes it has nothing to do with understanding. It's cognitively deterministic. It's something that a lot of us ordinary people don't know. You can't believe it. I feel normal. If you believe it all, this is not normal, but what about today regarding meteorological weapons? I found a very powerful example. It's a video. If there are college students in front of the screen, you can dig up the military theory course for college students at that time of your freshman year. There's a chapter called New Concepts Weapons. There is a certain university press in Shanshe published. I wrote this part at the time. That book has my name on the back. Of course, the name is not Zhongnun Swordsman. This old fan knows it. At that time, the teaching and research department wrote a piece by one person, New Concept Weapons. This part is my responsibility, and the book has a section called Weather Weapons. There are 2 weapons in it. It's called the Hot Storm Weapon. The second is the Manual Guided Typhoon Weapon, so-called Hot Storm Weapons. That is to say, in desert areas, we use lasers to heat the air, conform tornadoes or desert storms, sweep away enemy personnel and equipment. The so-called artificially guided typhoon weapon. That means releasing silver iodide, smoke grenades, or other chemical catalysts into the clouds of a typhoon or hurricane to change the course of a typhoon or hurricane and direct typhoons or hurricanes towards hostile nations as needed to damage enemy personnel and military installations, etc. You see, I guess I'm speaking the concept. Many people don't believe the concept when they hear it. However, it is normal. Don't say people don't believe it. I often quote an American military expert on the show. His name was McGregor. McGregor didn't believe much either, but in the end, he believed it. So I'm going to show you a video. What about this video? Very new. It was released on October 7th. A video of retired Colonel Douglas McGregor interviewing American climate and geoengineering scholar Dane Wick. I had a hard time finding this video. Translation is even more difficult. What about last night? After I found this video, one of my students worked overtime to translate this video. Translate to 3 in the morning. The original video is very long. I took a few clips, so please watch carefully.
All right. Hi, I'm Douglas McGregor, CEO for Our Country, Our Choice. We have with us one of our fan favorites, if you will, and that's Dane Wigington. And he heads Geoengineering Watch. He's got some interesting comments today in connection with the vicious Hurricane Helene that has done so much damage to us. Welcome, Dane.
Thank you for your continued attention to what's occurring in our skies, Colonel McGregor. This is nothing short of all-out weather warfare at this point. We can speculate about the agendas and objectives being carried out, but the fact that these storms are absolutely being manipulated and steered is inarguable. The denial of this fact is absolutely ludicrous at this point. We know the U.S. military and others around the globe, but U.S. military has been engaged in these operations since 1947, Project Cirrus. How far have they come since that point? So the cyclones are being kept weakened over water with manipulation of atmospheric pressure zones. And once they're near enough to the land-based network of frequency transmitters, the NEXRAD network, they are steered. And that steering is incredibly inarguable if we look at the animation of the frequency transmissions and their interaction with the storm, in this case, Hurricane Helene. We recorded that, and that video, if we can roll that now, the interaction is absolutely inarguable.
Good.
Result of natural processes and climate patterns, or was it manipulated? The circular blue flashes seen in this video are frequency transmissions from the NEXRAD network of transmitter installations. All available science evidence makes clear that atmospheric frequency transmissions can and do have a repelling effect on air masses, especially if and when the air masses have been seeded with electrically conductive nanoparticles. The brighter the blue flash from a frequency transmission installation, the more pronounced and powerful the repelling effect on any air mass or storm in the vicinity will be. Where there are no blue flashes, there is no transmission, thus no repelling effect, thus no resistance for a migrating storm. Translation: a migrating storm will be hindered from moving toward frequency transmissions and will easily migrate in a direction with no transmissions. So again, I ask, was Hurricane Helene's path and behavior just an act of nature, or was it engineered? You decide.
Well, Dane,
Yes.
the question here is, how does this hurricane's path differ from others that we've seen? I've already had a lot of people call me from the Asheville area, talk specifically about the horrendous damage, and many of them pointed out that that is not Hurricane Alley per se. It's not an area that normally attracts storms. Can you help us understand this?
Well, the bottom line is it was directed there, as the transmission recordings clearly show. They kept that moisture corralled there to deluge in the same location. So again, these are patented technologies, and the fact that we have the entire so-called meteorological community denying that this is going on to protect their paychecks and pensions is absolutely criminal at this point. We know we have private defense contractors that are neck deep in the patents that manipulate these storms, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. We know those two in particular do the weather modeling for the nation's weathermen, National Weather Service and NOAA. Again, both agencies have an illegal federal gag order on them. So at this point, this is an emperor has no clothes moment. That's the best description I can give for something that is so blatantly obvious and inarguable, can only be considered weather warfare at this point.
If you can do so, could you tell us about some of your recent discussions, conversations, briefings that you've had with political leaders from the states in question that have asked you what you think? First of all, what did they specifically ask you, if you can tell us, and how did they respond to your answers?
Yes, Colonel McGregor, I had an hour conference call yesterday with the representatives and senators from the Carolinas, and we presented the data to them to answer their questions about how this manipulation occurs. They realized this was not a natural event. They're trying to digest the fact that their states were literally under assault from weather modification operations that are clearly connected with DoD operations, and we can speculate again on the agendas and objectives being carried out, but the fact that the storm was manipulated is absolutely inarguable. We know that technology to stop these rotations from even occurring has existed for decades with the manipulation of atmospheric pressure zones. HAARP in Alaska is one example many people are familiar with. That's an ionosphere heater. That's a weapon of mass destruction, period. It can cause an electrical chain reaction in the ionosphere, which heats it to extraordinarily high temperatures, which causes the atmosphere to bulge up and down. The downward push creates a high pressure dome that can steer the jet stream. And the same type of manipulation can create low pressure zones. When they have this type of power over the climate system, they can make or break these storms anytime they want. And again, what we see now is storms kept weaker as they're over the ocean because they're harder to steer until they reach the land-based network of transmitters. And then we have, Colonel Macgregor, rapid intensification. You've heard that term probably a lot lately, because that's how they manipulate these storms. And again, we have Acapulco last October being the extreme example of rapid intensification. An insignificant low pressure system developed into the strongest Cat 5 hurricane to ever hit that part of the world in less than 24 hours, laid waste to Acapulco. And by the way, Hurricane John, which just hit Acapulco again as Hurricane Helene was wreaking havoc in the Carolinas. Not many people know that. So Acapulco just got dealt another blow. So again, how many agendas and objectives are being carried out when we know they can manipulate these storms and we know they can make or break them anytime they want? And again, I bring up the oil infrastructure in the Gulf of Mexico that seems to magically miss any sort of damaging storm again and again and again, while the storms wreak havoc inland and on shorelines. It's not a coincidence. They have that much sway over the storms.
Yeah. Well, when you highlighted these anomalies to the audience of political leaders, representatives and so forth, how did they react? Did they react with a degree of serious skepticism, or did they take you seriously?
They're in shock. They're in shock, because when you realize that you're literally at war with those who control the federal government, how does one digest that? And when we go all the way back to, again, as I've referenced many times, even 1962, 62 years ago, Lyndon Johnson, President Johnson, then stating we had the power to control the world's cloud layer, and he who controls the weather controls the world. We're seeing this happen all over the globe. We're seeing countries like Dubai, as you remember recently, got 2 years worth of rain, 2 years worth in 6 hours, right after they decide to ditch the dollar. Is that a coincidence? We see this kind of event over and over. So climate engineering is the crown jewel weapon of the military industrial complex, because they can and are bringing populations to their knees without those populations ever even knowing they're under assault, and they blame it on nature. That's why this is such a coveted weapon, and they're not about to give it up, even though it's destroying the ozone layer.
Okay, the video is over. Do you believe it? If you don't believe me, it doesn't matter. Because this in itself is a subversive thing, trying to change perceptions. Learning and improvement are not behind this era. Welcome to continue to pay attention to Zhongnan Swordsman. And finally, I want to leave you with a joke. The dapping I mentioned on yesterday's show, he hasn't paid me any attention yet. Such a talented internet user. I also want to get to know each other. Everyone, help me find dapping. Okay, follow the South Central Swordsman, interpret the latest topics for you,